These are the numbers I track in my landscape company to see if we're doing good or bad, because sadly, business is not based on how you feel. If you're feeling great, you can still go out of business, and if you feel crappy, you could be doing amazing. These are the numbers that tell you how we're doing. So first, we're going to go over the musts and then the shoulds. For the musts, number one most important thing is going to be labor as a percentage of revenue. And what that is how much money we're paying people as a percentage, so like the portion of that, of the money that we're taking in. And for us, we want this number to be between, call it 35 and 40%, just to give you a little bit of a range there. And it's just going to depend on what you do for service-wise. We're mainly maintenance-based services, but that's right where we want this. We don't have a lot of expenses and materials, which is why ours is right around there. Most of that's just labor for lawn mowing, weeding, and that kind of stuff. That's a very important number to track, because that way you know if you're profitable or not. Because if you know what that number is, you kind of can figure out your expenses from there, which we'll go over in a second. And I'm going to go over this way more detail in some other videos. But estimate close rate. You need to know how many estimates you send out, what you're closing on those, right? And for different services, right? So your mowing close rate might be different than your project close rate, which might be different from your, I don't know, pick a service close rate. So you can break this out by category. Service Autopilot's great at this. That's what we use. But either way, you need to know this number, because you need to know, okay, well, how many estimates do I have to send to get a job, right? And those should be based on profitable stuff. And if you have any issues there, you can figure those out. Like, okay, if you bid it unprofitably, but you still want it, that's just something to keep in mind. Now, not for this talk, but estimate close rate, right? We want to keep this number for us. We want it to be between 33 and 50%. Now that you're like, wow, dude, that's a massive range. It is. And it depends on the next thing I want to talk to you about, which is how many hours you're booked out. If you are booked out for 8 weeks and your crews are totally maxed out, you're fully at capacity, right? Your estimate close rate should be maybe even below 33%. Like you cannot possibly sell more work. Like your teams don't have enough space. And I'm talking in the maintenance, and projects are like, big projects, $100,000 things are different. But for us, if we're booked out 8 weeks, we know we got to raise prices. Whereas, if we're booked out like a day, it's like, holy crap, we need to win jobs. We better bid less hours so that we can get close to that 50% number so that we can get booked out, and then we're good to go. So that's why these two are related. The fourth thing that's most important is something that I look at every single morning. I got that from Alex Ramosi, because things you look at are the things you track, which is what all this is actually. But every morning I wake up, I look at my bank balance, and I look at what the credit cards we've spent on, I look at our line of credit, I look at everything to see where we're at, get an overall picture of the business. You need to know your cash balance, right? This is one of the easiest numbers on here to look at. You can just pull up on your phone. Some people are afraid of it. I used to be afraid of it, honestly. Like, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, that's so low. Doesn't matter. You need to know that number, because if that number does get low, you have to have plans in place. You need to make plans. You need to figure stuff out. If you're going to collect on stuff, all of that needs to be figured out, because if you don't look at this number and then all of a sudden it's super low, it's going to be too late and you're going to be in a world of hurt. Customer acquisition costs. We're going to talk later about breaking that down into more granular detail, but at this point, all we're talking about is how much your marketing spend, your total spend in marketing, right? If you want to include I like to include my time in that as well, but your total spend in marketing divided by the amount of new customers you've gotten, and that's your customer acquisition cost from a big picture level. We like to see this number, the customer acquisition cost. We're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of like my preference would be $100. Like anything below 100, and I'm stoked. As far as just go over some quick numbers real quick for you. How many hours booked out? I don't really have a preference on that number for the season. I mean, I'd prefer that we're over a week booked out, because then we have some security there to figure out if we need to turn up marketing. If we're less than a week to 2 weeks booked out, then it's kind of scary, because it takes a sec for some marketing to ramp up usually, or to get the mailers out, or get the Facebook ads turned on and converting, that kind of stuff. And then for cash balance, this number is a really hard one. I'm gonna make a whole other video on it, but I would say you want to have at least a week of payroll in the account, and a week, or at least 2 weeks of expenses in the account as a cash balance, just in case something goes wrong when you're starting and growing, scaling. But that might be bad advice. We're going to go over that more later. Just wanted to give you a number. We talked about customer acquisition costs, and look at the numbers. What I mean by this is, if you use QuickBooks, look at your dang QuickBooks. Do the expenses and look at the QuickBooks. This needs to be done at least monthly, right? The rest of these numbers I prefer to do daily or weekly. This last one must be done monthly, right? If you're not looking at your books, and if you're waiting till the end of the year because you're so busy that you don't even have you don't even care what your business is doing, right? That's like dropping your kid off at school and leaving there for 6 months. Like, no, you need to watch it. You need to see how it's doing, right? You need to know your numbers. Just look at them. Just look at them and see where you're at, right? Okay, oh crap, we're spending a bunch of money on this. Oh, we're spending a lot of money on that. Oh, let's move this around. You can make the game time decisions. Whereas if you don't do that, and you get to the end of the year and you realize you've lost $10,000, like, you might as well just not work that year. You could have just blew it at the casino January 1 and been good. So make sure you know your numbers and look at your numbers. Now, those are the musts. These are things you must be doing on at least a weekly basis. I prefer to do this on a daily basis. I have our customer service reps type out a report, so I get these numbers on a daily basis. And then this last one, I look at it a weekly basis. But these first 5, we need these at a daily basis because it lets you make decisions on the business and see how you're performing and how you're doing. It's like, taking a temperature of something, or it's like, making sure the business is feeling okay. If one of these is wrong, like, it has an upset stomach, let's fix that, right? These are the musts. These are things we need to calculate. Now, over here are the shoulds. These are the things that, as you continue to grow the company, give you more insight in the business, especially when you're not dealing with every customer phone call. First thing is the average dollars an hour. Very similar to the labor as a percentage of revenue, kind of. The difference is that this is how much your teams are making per hour. So if you have a job that's $100 and the guys work 1 hour, you've made $100 an hour, right? If you have a job that's $100 and there's 2 guys there, $50 an hour, right? Just to give you kind of number where we want to be with this, I would say, anything above 60 and you're in a really good spot. It depends on where you are in the country. In Texas, that number could be closer to 45 to 50. Jonathan Potoshnik, the Lawn Care Millionaire guy that founded Service Autopilot, said that if this number is below 40, you can't be in business. He's like, and he's in Texas, which is one of the cheaper labor rate states, or at least it was. You have to be above 40, right? I like to see this number personally. 60 to 70 is where I like to see it, for where we're at. Cost of fulfillment or cost of goods sold, right? This is how much you're spending to do the work physically. So labor, gas, materials, and those kind of expenses. And I actually even lump in our payroll costs. So I actually lump in our insurance, our workers' comp insurance in this, because that's the cost of fulfillment to me, right? That's what we're spending to fulfill the service. And I like to see this number below 50%. Anything below 50%, and we're good to go here. If we're above 50%, I know we got a problem going because it's just crazy. And then the other thing that we do that's really cool, as a side note from the customer acquisition and marketing side, is for landscape jobs, we get a 50% deposit. So we're getting paid to do this for the cost of goods before we do the work, which gives us a little bit easier on the collection side. Now, overhead, expenses. Right? What you're spending, and I know I'm using overhead kind of loosely here, but is the expenses you have if the business shut down tomorrow, right? Just the business that have to happen. And the expenses that have to happen, and those actually would be called there's fixed and variable. But at the very least, I like to, we call all of our office people in this, our software expenses, there's so many overhead expenses for us. Basically, it's almost all of our the expenses that aren't cost of goods that are also not marketing is what I put into this bucket. Not a financial guy, but that's just what I do. And I like to see this number below 30%. So in case you've done some math here, 50%, 30%, that gives us 20% left over as profit or money that we can dump into marketing, to acquire new customers. That's where I like to see it as a general thing for us. Cost of customer acquisition cost per campaign. Why this matters is if you know your general customer acquisition cost, it might be $150, right? But then you look and you're going, oh, my pay-per-click ads, my customer acquisition cost there is $400. My Facebook customer acquisition cost is $50. Well, then that's per campaign. Okay, let me take all of my money out of Google Ads and let the lesson testing it later and put it into Facebook because that's where it's converting. Now, I'm just using this as an example. It's not necessarily true. I mean, it is for us, but those aren't actual numbers. But this is something that you need to make sure you're tracking, or even your LAC, would be lead acquisition cost, which is how much a lead costs. Accounts receivable, right? Obviously, this is a number a lot of people get their bent out of shape over because they get really high for some people. If you're somebody that still collects a lot of checks and stuff, this might be a must watch item for every day, every week. And I still do watch this every day, every week, but I get this every day. But accounts receivable, because that's the money people owe you and haven't paid you yet. You've done the work and people owe you the money. For us, this number is pretty low generally, just because, and I realize I'm standing in the way of it, so sorry. This number is pretty low for us because accounts receivable is just, it's money people owe us, and if we're charging by credit cards, it's not something that's super, we have to worry about because we just charge the card the day after service. Cancellations, how many people are canceling, right? If all of a sudden, it's good to watch because if all of a sudden your cancellation numbers are going up, it's like, oh no, what are we messing up? There's something the team's messing up for this to happen, so let's figure it out so we can adjust. Number of new clients / leads. So this just tells you how you're doing. If you're trending up, getting a lot more, and if this number is higher than this number, so if your new clients are above your cancellations, you're growing, and if it's the other way around, you're shrinking generally. And then number of estimates sent / won. So number of estimates you sent out versus number of estimates you won. Very similar to your estimate close rate. The only thing is this gives you more of the actual numbers, so you can see if you're getting more busy or getting less busy, which also relates back to how many hours booked out. Landscape hours sold. Now this is just same thing. hours booked out. I just like to see the number for every day, for every week, so I can see how we're trending. Same thing with number of lawns sold, budgeted hours. And this is, for tracking, budgeted hours worked, actual hours worked, right? A lot of these things are interrelated, obviously, but this is just kind of getting more nuanced, which is how many hours have been worked, how many hours have been scheduled for that day, and how many hours are we charging the customer for versus how many hours did we work, right? If the actual hours is above the budgeted hours, sad face generally. If the budgeted hours is above the actual hours, happy face generally. Dollars of work completed, right? This just tells us how many dollars of work we've completed every day. And I like to look at that, look at payroll, and just kind of get a sense of where we're at. This number is actually one of my favorite numbers to look at to see how we're doing. And, it obviously relates back to our labor as a percentage of revenue, but I really like to look at this number. And then non-billable hours, right? How many hours did the team spend non-billable, right? I'm not including the office in that. I'm not including our general manager in that, our estimator, whatever you want to call it. What I'm looking at for this is the field team, right? Because I want to keep this number as low as humanly possible. We have a guy that comes in at night to actually make this number as low as humanly possible, preferably 0 or close to it. And then the last thing is churn percentage into LTV. This is that's an Alex Hormozi thing, but basically looking at the pie equation is what he calls it. Look up the video of his; it's awesome. But basically looking at that and saying, okay, well, what percentage of my customers have left? And then based on that, what's my average lifetime value and how much am I charging them? So how much is each customer worth? And this is something that's really important to check at least on a weekly to monthly basis to see where you're at, which the churn percent is just how many customers you've lost. Like the churn is the percentage of customers you've lost. So yeah, these are the basic metrics that I have, the musts and shoulds in my landscape company. This is what allows me to know what's going on and feel good about it because I can catch problems early. Right? If you've ever seen those big rig trucks, those massive trucks, like the semis, 18-wheelers, they have like 100 gauges, not really, probably whatever, 25 gauges in there, whereas your passenger car only has like 3. The reason why they have so many gauges is because if they look, oh, the airflow sensor is a little bit off, that could be a problem, let me replace the air filter. Whereas if we don't have that gauge, they didn't know what was going on, they didn't have that number, they didn't have their cost of fulfillment, whatever, all of a sudden they don't replace the air filter, they don't fix the problem, and then it cascades much worse, and then all of a sudden the engine breaks and the engine needs a rebuild, and you're almost out of business, you did a massive cash injection, and there's a problem. This is why it's important to look at the numbers and know your numbers. So these are the numbers I track in Full Circle Landscape Solutions. I'd love to know what numbers you guys track, if I missed any that you track or don't track, or if you think some of these numbers are just BS and you don't have to worry about them. So love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. Comment down below, and other than that, I'll see you in the next one.